Well guys, you might recognize this place from this camera angle, maybe not. We're at Micro Center today, so this is sort of an impromptu last-minute trip we're taking here because we got a new camera. In fact, we're filming on it right now. You may or may not have noticed it. It's the new Sony FX6. We dropped the footage in Phil's computer and we're like, why is the computer so slow? Oh yeah, because this camera is like 4 times the bit rate. So here's what we're gonna do today. We are going to walk around, we're actually gonna spec Phil a new editing rig out of necessity. But also out of necessity is this. The new SkyTube mid-tower case from Montech features improved direct airflow with fine mesh intakes, 3 pre-installed RX120 ARGB fans, supports motherboards all the way up to EATX while supporting top-mounted 360 radiators, and even fits the largest 40 series GPUs on the market, all while not breaking the bank. To see the full list of features, follow the sponsored link in the description below. Okay, so let's go and start with the main platform pieces here. As you can see, this is clearly going to be an Intel board. This is the Aorus Z790 Aorus Master. Pretty high-end board. What we need is, we need high single clock speeds, and we'll explain why in a second here, but we also need to have plenty of NVMe storage. Phil's current rig, it's an AMD Threadripper 3970 WX or whatever the nomenclature was, which was great for the time. The problem is he uses Premiere a lot. And we're gonna be switching over eventually here to DaVinci Resolve, because he's been kind of playing around with the side, kind of getting into it, but there's a learning curve there, and he's very proficient in Premiere. Premiere is not multi-threaded. Premiere's multi-threading is terrible. In fact, it'll use 1, maybe 2 cores depending. So going back, the CPU we're going with right here is the i9-13900K. Although this would make a great gaming CPU, you'd be surprised how much of a overlap there is between gaming computers and editing computers. So 13900K, we would have loved a KS, again, just for the extra boost clock. It's only 100 megahertz, so this is still 5.9 gigahertz, 5.8, 5.9 gigahertz, and we could even play with overclocking a little bit if we want. Probably not gonna need it, because coming up from the IPC improvement from the 3rd generation Threadripper to the 13th gen is gonna be like night and day for him. So RAM is gonna be interesting here because of the fact that we're moving up to DDR5, which will definitely help. The downside is that we would love to go with like 128 gigabytes because DDR5 has double the capacity. Unfortunately, there are no 128 gigabyte like kits yet. So if we wanna go with 128, we'd have to do 64 times 2. Well, we also know if you mix and match sets of RAM, you can't run XMP, especially with 13th gen. AMD won't even boot at all, especially like the new AM5 stuff. So we're gonna be kind of figuring out what we're gonna be doing for RAM here in a second, but fast RAM, fast single core clock is what we're after, which is why 13th gen makes the most sense in this instance here. Also too, when it just comes to Premiere and DaVinci Resolve, like compatibility and the best running system that we can have for those programs, they tend to favor Intel. In terms of graphics here, RTX 4090, this is just the gaming OC 24 gig. It's the pretty basic 3-fan air cooler card. They had a water-cooled card we could have gone with too. Not necessary for this instance. One, we want ultra reliability, which means less AIO pumps to go bad, or things that can go bad on us, or leak or fail or whatever. This isn't even about gaming. In fact, we don't even care about the fact that it's a 4090. What we want is the 24 gigs of VRAM. You guys know Phil's montages. You guys know his montages have tons and tons of layers, and you'd be surprised. Phil has actually capped out the 64 gigs of system RAM, and because we're using the GPU to accelerate the timeline, the more VRAM we can have there, the better. So this could be a 4060 for all we care. If it had tons of VRAM that's fast, that's what we'd be using. This is the most amount of VRAM that we can get currently, so this is what we're gonna be using right here. Not to mention, it's gonna really play Rocket League well for Phil. But no, we actually told them, don't give us the water-cooled one. We need ultra reliability to be able to easily change it out if we need to for some reason. So that's why we went with the Gigabyte WindForce card right here. The other thing is storage. The camera that we're using, like I said, has massive file sizes versus the FS5. The FX6 is amazing. It really upped the bit rate for both 1080p and 4K, and we shoot native 4K. So anytime he would move a file into his timeline and move it around, it would chug. Just terrible. And then we realized, like, what happened? Why is the system suddenly slow? It's because of the camera. We put FS5 footage in there and it works perfectly fine. So we're gonna have a dedicated Gen 4 scratch disk on NVMe, and we're also gonna have a main storage drive and then an OS drive. We're gonna separate that stuff as much as we possibly can. That way it's as smooth as possible for his editing. This is the first time we've actually built a system from scratch with very specific reasons in mind as why we're choosing certain parts. Normally it's just like, hey, let's go into the warehouse, let's build something fun for Phil, and it also will work as an editing rig. Now we're trying to actually make it specific for various reasons. Let's go see what our RAM options are, because when it comes to DDR5, that's where things are really kind of wonky right now. Okay, so what we have right here are 2 match kits of Corsair Vengeance, 64 gigs, 5200 megahertz CL40. There is a chance that this will not post or run properly with 2 kits like this. We know that that's a possibility. They are on the QVL. However, we're asking a lot of the memory controller to run 128 gigabytes. So this will be running the stock 4800 megahertz, not the 5200. I think they even had 5600. We specifically were like, let's get the lesser one because we can't enable XMP with this profile or this setup anyway. For Phil in the editing, it really is about the quantity of the RAM, not the speed of the RAM. So he needs as much RAM as possible. He's got 64 gigs right now in his Threadripper system, and he has chewed through that and used it all up to the point where he's even had to restart the systems because of the fact that he would use up all the RAM and the system would completely slow down. And the only way to free it up and have it, whether it's a leak or something somewhere in the software, has to completely restart the system. So we're hoping 128 will alleviate that. We're also really hoping that these will boot in the Aorus Master at stock speeds. Okay, so Phil really wants to try Western Digital Blacks this time around on the NVMe drives. We haven't used these before. So we have 2 1 terabyte drives. One's an OS SSD. One is a scratch disk SSD, which means it's the one he'll be editing on. And the 2 terabytes is gonna be the footage / mash storage. So this is where the storage is gonna be for the video files. This is the drive he's gonna edit them on, and then that's the OS drive. So we're separating up as much as possible, which also limits our exposure if something were to fail on how much data we're gonna lose. Fortunately, nothing has happened like that yet, knock on wood, but the fact that we're gonna be getting off some of the older Gen 3 drives now, especially when it comes to the size of the footage that we're dealing with here, this is gonna be like a night and day system. Okay, so a couple things to keep in mind here. This is ATX 3.0 Corsair RM1000X. They call it the Shift. If you look, all the plugs are on the side. We're not going with that one. We're gonna go with the older one up here because of the fact that this one right here, even though it's the older ATX 2.0, the ATX 3.0 here, the RM1000X, technically doesn't support a 4090 because it only goes up to the 450 watts. So it actually does support a 4090, but you wouldn't get any overclocking out of it. We're not gonna overclock it anyway, but our slider would be locked. Remember when we did what happens when you use 3 of the 4 or 2 of the 3 or whatever? It's because each one of those is 150 watts worth of power. We also don't know if we like the cables coming out the side and if it'll work in our case. So I have the Corsair replacement cable to turn it into a 12 volt high power, plugging directly native into the power supply. So we're just gonna go with the 1000X because of the fact that I have that cable. I want to avoid using the adapter, just not because we're worried about it burning, it's because it's ugly, if you want to know the truth. There is some aesthetics that we have to maintain on this channel, obviously. All right, so for cooling on this, we're gonna go with the Dark Rock Pro 4. I do have Be Quiet AIO at the studio as well. There's a slight chance we might switch to that. I don't know. For ultra reliability though, we're thinking that air cooling for the editing rig is gonna be the best way to go. It is a dual tower, double fan. It has plenty of TDP to be able to deal with the 13900K. It's just, I don't know. Everything inside of me is so used to water cooling, it feels weird. But like I said, I do have the Be Quiet AIO that I might call an audible on an executive decision, this one, but we'll see how I feel about this later. Okay, so for the case, Phil has decided on the Fractal Torrent. This is the RGB version, so it has RGB fans in the front, and then it has pre-installed, I think they're 140s on the bottom. And it's an interesting case because of the fact that on the top is where the power supply goes, almost like the old beige boxes used to. So it's giant 180 millimeter fans in the front, 2 of them bringing air in, and 3 on the bottom bringing air in, creating a full positive pressure case. And then everything else is just perforated, as you can see on the back there, to just let all the airflow go right out the back. So no case fans or anything on the top. As you can see, it's sealed off up here, and it's just designed to have positive pressure. That's it. We have a pretty dusty environment where we live, so we'll see how well this is gonna filter. You better stay on top of it, unlike your current case, which is like, looks like a whole cat in the front of it. Okay, so that's pretty much everything. I don't think we're missing anything. All right, so kind of like how I did my build, we're gonna just sort of take you guys along for the ride. We've already gone through all the parts and why we chose them. Something I wanna point out real quick, I forgot to mention as we were at the store, a lot of you were like, oh, this sucks, there's no Micro Center near us. There's actually a few Micro Center stores that are opening between now and 2025. However, if you're in the Indianapolis area, you might wanna keep your eyes peeled around summertime. So with that just said, let's go ahead and move on. And some people right now are like losing their mind because they're like, oh my God, we're getting a Micro Center. So,
what was that?
Oh my God, we're getting a Micro Center. Anyway, I want to take a look at the 4090 real quick because, like I said, this is kind of the no frills one, which is fine. Like I said, this is not a gaming rig, although it is a perfect gaming rig. That sound. We needed the VRAM, and we didn't want a water-cooled card because of the fact that we don't want anything to fail. That is still ginormous for just a regular one.
That's a regular?
This is just the no frills, basic air-cooled, not anything fancy to write home about version of a 4090. It's still massive. But again, the PCB only goes to right there. They're not big PCBs, they're just big cards. It's still a 4-slot. It's like a 4-slot card, look at that. Well, Phil,
sick.
We'll just set this over here for now.
Dude, I can't wait to get 9 million FPS in Rocket League.
You know what? I've never actually seen the i9 like retail packaging. We always just get, oops, retail version, or not retail, but like press version, which is always a prettier box. But this is actually pretty nice. Do you think it would be like $20 less if they just didn't go with this packaging? I like to work on the motherboard out of this. That's heavy. My goodness. Anyway, I like to work on the board outside of the case as much as possible. So that means I'm gonna get any bracketry installed that needs to be on there. Our drives need to be in there. RAM has to go in before the cooler at this point, I think, because the cooler is probably gonna overhang on the RAM. So we can get a fair amount of this build done. Let's use it this way. We can get a fair amount of this build done outside of the case because we're not doing water cooler or any of that, which is weird. However, we're not gonna be overclocking the 13900K or anything. That's such a pretty board, look at that.
Oh, wow.
I kind of wish you'd gone with the gunmetal case now, only because this would have tied in better. But the gunmetal one we have is an RGB. Apparently this is a nano carbon coating, as it says on there, but. So, CPU first. I'm so tempted right now to use one of our 12th gen mounting bracket things that DeBauer sent us, because 13th gen and 12th gen are exactly the same in terms of like their layout and stuff, but maybe I won't, because we probably won't need it. I only have one of those brackets left, and I have other builds I need to do with the 13900K. I think for now, like I said, we're just gonna leave this as is. Always leave these with the motherboard box, because if you ever go to take it out of your system later, same thing with the sleeve for the CPU. If you ever go to take it out of your system later and rebox it or something, you're gonna be like, where did I put it? You need to protect the pins, especially if you ever have to send it for RMA. I'm just wondering now, based on how many drives we put in here, are we gonna run out of lanes? Like, if I were to put 4 drives in and a 4090, we'll just stick with the 3 that we have. We'll figure out backup solution for you. But look, Gigabyte also has the little captive dealies, which are nice.
What?
Instead of having to deal with screws. Okay, so this one here is our 1 terabyte. So this is gonna be one of the OS drives. Oh yeah, I have to take off the heat sinks on these. Western Digital Blacks were like, for the longest time, they were like the industry standard for anyone building a gaming computer with a spinning drive. Now, this is my first time using their SSDs. Kind of excited, to be honest. So every SSD we've ever bought before that has a cooler on it, this one also has RGB, which makes contact there when it's pushed down. That's just held on by thermal pads, and then you can take it apart. Well, Western Digital decided to glue this one to the backing. So what we're gonna see right now is if I can use my heat gun to loosen up some of that adhesive, slide this behind there, which people have been doing. That means apparently there's definitely no SSDs or chips on the back or anything because it's flat. So see if a little heat will get it to release. If not, we will be using the 2 terabyte, and then I'll have to switch to some crucial drives that we have and use these in a different build. I don't know why manufacturers are putting heat sinks on these now, especially ones that can't be removed, considering the fact that every single motherboard now has a heat spreader built in, and they work pretty well. So this would suck because this means you would obviously have to leave the cover off if you're gonna use these, which clearly would not look very good in here. It would be pretty ugly. Also too, under here with this big giant heatsink is another M.2 slot. We'll be putting the operating system drive there. Now I need to see if I can just get this to come off. If not, well, look how much glue they used on the bottom. See, that's why when there's people that are like, oh, you should have a razor blade in there. It's like, there's traces on the back. You don't want to shove a razor blade. I don't see any damage. We'll know if they show up when we go to install Windows. Yeah, I fixed it plain. Anyway.
It's like the knife that Thanos had that you
yeah.
like the perfectly balanced.
Perfectly balanced. Perfectly balanced. One doesn't work now. Anyway, do as I say, not as I do. Yeah, so that was something we learned today, that the drive coolers that are built into the Western Digital Blacks are not intended to come off. So now we have the 2 terabyte Western Digital Black there, the 1 terabyte P5 Plus, which is also a Gen 4 drive right here. That's a 1 terabyte. And then under this cooler right here, which I might as well just leave off because I have to have this off to mount the motherboard down anyway, is this 1 terabyte Western Digital Black storage drive. Not storage drive, but it's OS drive. So as you can see, there's a heatsink on there that touches it. That's the drive right there. And it has little captive screws on here, which is nice because it's very nice not to mount down those tiny little Phillips. But you can see right there's a mounting hole, and right there's a mounting hole for the motherboard mount. And this covers that. So we'll leave this off until I'm ready. Next thing I'm gonna have to do now is cooler bracket. Cooler brackets have to be mounted to this. And then I should be able to then pretty much get it inside the case. That's what I'm saying, like so many motherboards now have proper heat dissipation for SSDs. If you buy an SSD that has a cooler attached to it like we just did, you're gonna have to either leave the cover off or see if your motherboard has a spot that has no cooler or something on it. Otherwise, just avoid those altogether. Like I said, that Western Digital drive is the first one I've ever come across that didn't just pop off and have heat pads on either side. Like actually glued down seems completely unnecessary. I'll leave the cover on this so I don't scratch it in the meantime. I already took the cover off that one because I'm an idiot. And then, there we go. So now we can bust into our Dock Rock 4. Get out our 1700 bracket. It's gonna be located in there. There's a big old air cooler the size of this thing. Oh, the fans are popping out. There's our screwdriver that we will need to mount this. You have to use the screwdriver it comes with because it is designed to go right down these holes right here. So this comes off, this comes off. Why is there dust on there? It hasn't been sitting on the shelf that long, has it? At Micro Center. So then this goes down through there to be able to mount the bracket down. So you gotta use the screwdriver that it comes with. And it's worthwhile to hang on to it in case you ever have to take this off. What's gonna be interesting about this too is once the cooler is on there, it will make accessing some of these holes difficult for mounting it down. So we're just gonna see how this goes. Phil chose this RAM specifically because it doesn't have RGB. He does not want to have to run RGB programs. So we will not be running XMP profile on these because of the fact that we're running 4 sticks. Phil's more than welcome to play around with XMP and see how far he can get it to go. Because he won't be using the system immediately, he's gonna have to like transition over to this build over time after he knows everything's installed and perfectly stable. But there's another reason why this particular RAM set is perfect for this build. It's no RGB means a lower profile. And a lower profile means better cooler support. And since we know we're filling in all 4 RAM slots, this means now we should not have any sort of issue with our cooler. Oh yeah, it was just hitting the cable. See that? So it clears all 4 RAM slots. If we had tall RAM with RGB, we'd have to move the fan up, which wouldn't be as ideal because the top part of the fan would be pulling air from above the cooler. We want it pulling as much air through the cooler as possible. Then the second fan actually goes right there. So this is gonna be a cool blacked out looking build. And then I'm gonna be using, where'd it go? Oh, my Kingpin, Kingpin Extreme, the KPX thermal paste, because it's just our favorite thermal paste to use around here. That and the Crowd Not Extreme is also really neat. I find I can lower temps a few degrees with this, and since we're running a 13900K on an air cooler, I honestly feel like every amount of degree of cooling that I can add to this, the better. So I had to put this down first, which now means I'm covering 2 of those motherboard mounting holes. It won't technically be a problem because it's not an issue in terms of grounding. It's just, I want to see now if it's possible to get this off with the cooler mounted down. So if I bent those bottom fins, it would clear. I'm just not going to do that right now because we already tested the drive in another system and we know the drive works. So these kinds of systems, it's supposed to be easy to work on, but now we've essentially made a work rig here that if we have to change the drive, we have to remove the CPU cooler, which is not exactly the most user quote unquote friendly. This is such a heavy setup. I want to see what it weighs. It's overweight. Okay, it's more than 3,000 grams because that's where it stops. I'm gonna need a bigger scale to start doing this stuff. So as you can see, the top is where the power supply goes. No fan or airflow on the top at all. It's all through the bottom and the front and pushes out all this ventilation here. If you look at the backside, you can see there's a lot of cable management. There. These sleds can come out technically because they're for 5 1/4 drives. We don't have any of those. I'm gonna say 5 1/4, I mean 3.5. Geez, this Commodore 64 is really worn off on me. All right, so fast forward a little bit. The motherboard is in and most cables are managed. They could be a little bit neater, but you know what? Everything's easily accessible. I might just like zip tie these together though to make them a little prettier. I can do that after. That's really not all that important. But what is most important is that we can get to everything. So as you can see on the back side here, all this fan cables down here, because every fan cable is a daisy chain, which kind of stinks. And the Torrent has its own built-in fan splitter. So all our fans are in there. We added a 140 millimeter Be Quiet exhaust fan to the rear to just help exhaust the air. And it's just plugged into the motherboard here because its cable doesn't reach down to the controller. And then we pre-wired 8-pin EPS, 2 of them are 24-pin. And then we're gonna be using the Corsair RM replacement for the direct cable for the 12-volt high power. And then you have to take the top off of this case to be able to get the power supply in there. And fan side has to go down because remember, there's no ventilation on the top. So I never noticed this. They have these like pass-through ports right here for fills, like drain plugs or fill plugs or whatever for like water cooling. I never noticed that. It's pretty neat. But what's nice about this being such a short power supply is because if you look here, you can see how you have this kind of a ramp. If it were a long power supply, we'd be hitting that. So thank goodness that they're short. Keep that in mind. If you're running a high-end, high-watt power supply, like a 1200 plus, it may not clear here very well. This is why the new power supply with the fittings on the side is nice. I'm glad we didn't go with that though, because the whole side is plugs, and what is right here? That would have been a problem. It might have cleared, but this way I just know it works. All right, thank God for such a big interior, because this is a big boy. I want to point out, it does have the push button tab release. Thank goodness for that. The scary part is I turned on the power supply and no lights on the motherboard lit up. Did I turn the power supply off? Oh, it's on. Oh, there's no plug. Okay. That's a good sign. "17 trainings later, it actually posted with 128 gigs of RAM. Oh my God, this mouse sensitivity. Okay, 128 gigs. All of it showed up. 13900K, 13th gen. Okay, so that's our graphics card right there. So it is running 4.0 16X at 4.0 8X. So that's what sucks, is that with the amount of drives we have in there, it actually dropped it down to 8X. It's gonna suck, but this is a editing rig. We need the drive space, and NVMe's are PCIe lane dependent. That's how they connect to the CPU. We knew this was gonna happen. I even called it out to Phil. I said, if we put a 4th drive in here, that might hurt our PCIe lanes to our GPU even more. And I already said to him it might drop down to 8X, which it did. Bam, there's all 3 right there. Western Digital black down there, Western Digital black there. So everything's working. All I feel like we need to do is go in and turn on the fan speeds and stuff, so that way, you know, we can err on the side of being cooler. And then Nick's gonna actually print a cool GPU sag bracket, because it is sagging quite a bit. And I shouldn't do this while it's on, but it is sagging a lot. Anyway, moving on, huge thanks to Micro Center for sponsoring today's video and allowing us to go and rummage through their parts and kind of allow Phil to spec and build a dream system here for editing. This one should be working for us for quite a few years. And the only thing that probably will have to grow over time might be the storage in some way. And don't forget, like I said, there are new stores coming when it comes to Micro Center. And the very first one, like I said, if you're in the Indianapolis area this summer, you're gonna wanna be paying attention. And if you live not in the Indianapolis area and you've been hoping for a Micro Center nearby, keep your fingers crossed between now and 2025, because there are plans. All right, guys, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Phil set it up.